issue, but denied the Justice Department followed any order from the president.
Fox's Jared Halpern on Capitol Hill. White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grissom playing down Barr's comments. She says the president wasn't bothered by them at all and that Barr has the right to publicly offer his opinions. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calls Barr one of Trump's henchmen and says that his handling of the Stone sentencing deeply damaged the justice system.
The president is again trying to manipulate federal law enforcement to serve his political interests.
Speaker Pelosi among Democrats calling for an investigation. Attorney General William Barr has agreed to testify before the House Judiciary Committee next month.
Fox's Rachel Sutherland in Washington. A 15th case of the coronavirus confirmed in the U.S., this time among those quarantined at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas.
The CDC says the patient was a solo traveler and had not been near friends or family, so the risk of transmitting the virus to another person is low. Eben Brown, Fox News.
China says the virus has killed nearly 1,400 people, nearly 64,000 sickened. Meantime, the first passengers are off the cruise ship Westerdam in Cambodia and headed home. America's listening to Fox News.
Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in? Wait, hold on, that was last month. Now it's this month. But by popular demand, we're extending our New Year's solution 4.65% personal loan through February. Money for whatever you want at 4.65% APR from Bank Pacific. We're still celebrating.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
What does love mean to you? Is it passion, romance, or the feeling you get when making someone happy? Is it loyalty and commitment, or being completely vulnerable? Is love the feeling they sing about in songs or make movies about? Or is it just being with that one person who makes you feel safe? This Valentine's Day, celebrate the many ways to love with an exquisite 3-course dining experience perfectly crafted by Mezcla Bistro. From start to finish, you'll enjoy every bite and every moment with the person you love. Mezcla, a true taste of love.
A new deal's on the table as the U.S. and the Taliban try to work out a peace agreement in Afghanistan.
At NATO headquarters in Brussels, Defense Secretary Esper said the U.S. and the Taliban are close to an agreement.
We said all along that the best, if not only, solution in Afghanistan is a political agreement. Progress has been made on this front.
That progress includes a 7-day reduction in violence with the Taliban as they work towards a settlement, a deal to which President Trump appeared to give his blessing. Secretary of State Pompeo spoke en route to a security conference in Munich where he will meet the Afghan president. Quote, "It will be a difficult set of conversations, one that's long overdue. It would also give us the opportunity to reduce the footprint, not only for America's forces there, but for all forces."
Fox's Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. New Jersey's the only state where it's against the law for drivers to pump their own gas, but that may change soon if a bill in Illinois becomes law.
Here's what the bill says word for word. No gas may be pumped at a gas station in Illinois unless it is pumped by a gas station attendant employed at the gas station. Of course, the chances of that passing are slim. A lot of people don't like this because Illinois already has one of the highest gas taxes in the country. They say this would make gas even more expensive.
Fox's Grady Tremble. Deputies make a disturbing discovery in a home in Maysville, Missouri, a cage where they say parents would lock up their 9-year-old autistic daughter when she acted out. Chief Deputy Casey Kassaman says it was distressing.
I'm a father, and I can't imagine, I can't wrap my head around why somebody would do that to their own child. It's definitely a reminder that evil exists in the world.
Deputies charged the couple with child endangerment and abuse. And stocks fall as the cases of the coronavirus soar. The Dow slides 128 points. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Cocoa Coffee Company is now available at Circle K. Single-origin coffee beans carefully sourced and locally roasted to give you the freshest cup of coffee Guam has to offer. Grab a cup that's brewed every 30 minutes or purchase a bag of the locally roasted whole beans. Flavors now serving: light medium roasted Ethiopia and medium dark roasted Jamaican Blue Mountain. Exclusively available at Circle K. With every Cocoa Coffee Company purchase, a portion of the proceeds will go towards the Cocoa Recovery Program.
Hafa Day, this is Congressman Michael Sinicolas. Our veterans deserve the best, and I'm working hard to make sure they receive what they earned defending our freedom. If you need help receiving the benefits you earned from the VA or the Defense Department, please call my office at 475-6453 or go online at stnicholas.house.gov. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you for your service.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael Nicholas.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Right, real Joe Cruz?
The right of the people, sir.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
I'm with you, sir.
Thank you very much, real Joe Cruz. You have the opportunity to be with me at the beginning of every program here on Tall Tales, where we reverently read the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution dealing with the right to keep and bear arms. This foreshadows the conservative nature of our show, of my show, which is founded or based on the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the rule of law, motherhood, apple pie, and the American flag, among a few other things. So we always start the program with a feature called Zemi Ikatni. It's my backwards play on words. Backwards bilingual play on words that translates to meet the press. I look at what appears on the editorial pages of each of our newspapers, roundly criticize the Daily News by not having a local editorial, shift to the Post, usually give it high praise, and oftentimes award the coveted Blue Star to the Post. Now, historically, the Daily News has won the Blue Star 55 times, the Post 173 times. But several months ago, the Daily News started to boycott local editorials. They quit running editorials that were Guam-centric and started running all kinds of stuff from USA Today, the Gannett News Service, Lefties Are Us, you name it. And today is no exception. Today it's climate crisis is ravaging my Australia. And this is by Siobhan Field, a PhD student in global leadership and change, and an adjunct professor of entrepreneurship at Pepperdine University, a researcher and journalist working with the University of California Institute for Prediction Technology. So I read this, and since it deals with Australia, which until United quit flying down there, was right in our backyard. You could hop on a plane in Haggadah and jump off at Cairns, and it was a nice deal, but it's gone. As anyone who follows the news knows, they've had some horrendous fires in Australia. And that's what this column zeroes in on. It's special to USA Today. That's how it wound up in our newspaper. Here it goes. At least 33 people dead. More than 3,000 homes scorched. As many as 1 billion animals killed. Firefighters and equipment flown in from the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Singapore. 1.35 billion promised to the National Bushfire Recovery Fund. And now a cyclone, flooding, and torrential rains that have put out at least one major fire. And Siobhan then says, My beloved homeland is in a cataclysmic state. Yet while visiting Australia last month, I was told repeatedly that a climate crisis is not to blame for the months of devastating infernos in New South Wales and Victoria. Well, you know, those Aussies got their heads screwed on right. The narrative I heard over and over from Australians is that global warming is a myth and that this disaster is in fact caused by the environmentally focused political party, the Greens. I guess now, Real Joe Cruz, you can see why I made an exception and am reading this in the Demi.
I do.
Yeah. Demi Cotney portion of the show. It is the belief of many Aussies that the Greenies have restricted back burning of fire-prone rural areas and that they are the blame for atrocities we are experiencing. I guess I had to quit reading right here. So this is back burning. This is what it means, and this happens in forests everywhere. And I think probably the environmental wackos have done the same thing in American forests. As a forest grows, trees, of course, grow skyward, trying to get to the sun, but a lot of brush and other kinds of flammable materials will accumulate on the ground. In the natural world, these things would burn off from time to time without little Johnny coming out and setting a match to them. A lightning strike or something would cause this, what do they call it in this article? I guess they don't name it, but I would call it brush, would burn the brush away and reduce the fire hazard because the brush is much easier to start on fire than a tree that's 3 feet in diameter. But once the brush gets on fire, it can start the trees on fire and the whole thing can get out of control really fast. So this editorial says, it is the belief of many Aussies that the Greenies have restricted back burning of fire-prone rural areas and that they are to blame for the atrocities we are experiencing. And then she says, having spent much of my childhood on 33 acres of bushland in rural Victoria during a drought, I understand the importance of regularly clearing the land of dead trees and vegetation and burning dry, flammable, dangerous timber in a controlled manner. I have sat in awe at the foot of massive bonfires many times over the course of my life, witness to how crucial it is to responsibly manage the land. It is essential to remove dead fuel from the landscape. So that's what the Aussies are saying, that that the environmental wackos who are saying you can't burn that. That's a forest. You cannot burn it. Now, Siobhan comes back and says, in reality, the Green does support back burning. Yet the opposite narrative has been created to point the finger at the party and demonize its environmental ethos. And it's working. What is to come? Yeah, okay, well, we just take your word for it, I guess. You just throw 2 sentences in there and debunk the whole idea that the Greenies are responsible. Then she asks the rhetorical question, what is to come with further increases in temperatures? What will be the experience of flying from city to city be like for my nieces and nephews when they are adults? Will we see something like this in the United States? What will it take to get people to see through the deflect and distract tactics and acknowledge the climactic, not climatic, but climactic big picture? Well, if this were all I knew about fires, environmental wackos, global warming, etc., I'd say, Siobhan, I like the first part of your editorial better because it said, is the belief of many Aussies that the Greenies have restricted back burning of fire-prone rural areas, etc. And you really don't do anything but say, that's wrong, and global warming is so serious that I'm very, very worried. I would call this nothing more than left-wing propaganda. You may have a point, but you certainly didn't state it in this editorial. So much like the other stuff that Gannett and USA Today run for our local newspaper. So let's see, I've got Marvin on the line. I don't recall Marvin has ever called before. Hey, good afternoon, Marvin. Welcome to Tall Tales.
Hi, you were just mentioning about the back burning and the management of forests, and I've done research on that in California and stuff, and basically that's true. Since about 1990 in California, they totally stopped all forest management. They started with restricting the element of fire, firelands. You spun roads to get to fires. Basically you can't haul away a dead tree in California or anything anymore, or brush or anything else. They stopped the power company from back cutting around trees, clear cutting around their lines so they wouldn't start fires. And about 30 years later, this is what they have. They've got all this undergrowth. They're not managing the forest. So if man doesn't manage the forest, God will. Okay, so basically, and it burns it.
Yeah.
And a little known fact that very few people know, is that the Indians knew the same thing. Old forests are dead forests. There's no game or anything. I mean, there's no food. I knew this, grew up in Michigan and hunting. In the old forest there would be no deer or anything, no squirrels, because there was nothing to eat. There was nothing near the ground. All the trees blocked the sunlight. So the Native Americans used to burn also. They used to burn off their fields and stuff so that the game would have food to eat. So they actually used to manage the forest also. And then we were managing the forest, like I said, and then slowly but surely it started in the late 70s through the 80s. By 1990, all logging had stopped, any type of management. Basically, like I said, you can't, a tree falls down, you can't cut it up and haul it away in California. So it got very restrictive and all the way up down the East Coast. And then eventually, and also they started building more and more houses out in these forest areas. So then when the fire does take off, it gets away from them. So it's true. They basically stop, and then they point to what the environmentalists point to. Not getting into that whole thing, but they use that as they create it, then they point at it.
And this is all done.
See, this, we told you. One of the fact they're the ones that caused it. That's
right. And this is all done in the name of preserving the forest, right, Marvin?
Right.
You can't go in there and cut trees down. We have to preserve the forest, right?
Yeah, but what people don't understand is a forest is also, it's the same as it's a plant, okay? And it's the same as fields of corn and stuff. I mean, you can manage it, and I remember growing up in Michigan, the DNR, that was the Department of Natural Resources, would go in and clear cut, chop down acres of trees, just chop the whole forest down, and just go in there with a chainsaw and chop it down and let it go away. And they would do that to start the forest, so that for the game and stuff to have food and to start fresh forest growing again. Because once a forest gets to a certain maturity, I mean, it's wonderful to see big redwoods and everything. I'm not saying you cut the giant redwoods down or anything. Don't misunderstand me. But there's a certain point where you have to manage your forest. I mean, they proper environmental care is you manage your natural stuff. I mean, you don't just let it go. I went to Yellowstone about 5 years ago, and so much of Yellowstone was burned out. And I met a guy there. I stopped and I was so depressed because I came in from the east driving west, and it was just all burned. Everything it was really ugly, and they just let it all lay. And I mentioned this, why don't they go in and aren't we supposed to manage this? So no, what is this the nature way? This is bad to nature. We're just letting it regrow, which I guess is true. But Yellowstone was one of the places where they first stopped managing forests, and they've had massive fires there. I mean, they have fires every so many years. I mean, so much of Yellowstone is burned. It's unbelievable. And if you come in, it's probably been 5 years. It's probably greener now coming from east to west. In fact, I've talked to somebody and they said it was pretty. The flower and stuff are starting to come out. But basically, that's what it does. Mother Nature goes and burns it all. I mean, that's its way of managing the forest. And it's the same thing in Australia. Australia is very, very dry, and they have to take care of that. I mean, eventually it's going to have a lot of wind and stuff's going to get out of hand, and they won't be able to handle it.
So the
anyway,
most
that was my comment.
the most dangerous animal in the forest is the environmental wacko, Marvin.
Yeah, I know. Because they're not logical.
Exactly.
You got to be logical about this. You want to manage. I'm an environmentalist. I want to have clean water and nice forests and beautiful streams and everything. But that means you intelligently manage it, not just go over the edge and block everything. Just even things that are helpful. I said that all these fires and stuff. The power company, they're bankrupt, of course, because all the lawsuits against them. And anyway, but they used to come in and they're saying this here in Guam. They go, for typhoon, you go and cut the trees back. They used to do the same thing in California, and they were unable to do that anymore. They're not able to clear cut around the power lines or anything like they used to. Anyway, okay, that was my input. I agree.
Very good, Marvin.
And the thing of it is we're not powerless. We could be doing stuff like in Australia. Rather than say it's global climate change, it's global warming, is something we really can't control, if it is happening. I'm not going down that road. What can we do if it is happening? I mean, we're intelligent human beings, let's manage it, take care of it. Not just sit on our hands and complain, So anyway, okay.
Great points, Marvin. Thank you very much for
You're
calling
welcome.
and sharing with us today. Well, once again, Marvin says we're intelligent human beings, and we all are. Sometimes I wonder about one segment of the population, the Democrats, because all of this environmental wacko stuff, all of the climate change, global warming, therefore we have to do all of these horrendous things, comes from the left wing of the Democrat Party. I don't know what they call themselves down in Aussie, but it sounds like from reading this editorial that there are some people down there that have their heads screwed on right. And they know about back burning. And if one were to judge based on this editorial, I could easily see people like the Greenies saying, "Oh no, you can't back burn out there. That's part of nature. You can't burn out there. Come on, man." Yeah, so much for, obviously the Daily News is not going to get a blue star today. Now, let's go from there to the Post. Coronavirus readiness needs refining. Many people agreed with Governor Lulian Guerrero's administration when she decided last week that Guam cannot let the cruise ship MS Westerdam, part of Holland America, pull into her island's only civilian seaport. Jitters felt globally over the rapidly spreading coronavirus that began in Wuhan, China, prompted ports in Manila and Japan to turn away the cruise ship. Guam became the third destination to decline the cruise ship's request to make a stopover. Taiwan followed Guam, and finally yesterday, after the cruise ship was aimlessly adrift for more than a week, Cambodia allowed entry. One of the main reasons several destinations rejected the Westerdam was that more than 1,400 passengers on the cruise ship, about 800 had recently boarded from Hong Kong. The cruise ship did state last week that not a single case of contagion from the virus has been found on board. Still, Guam's governor felt it was better to be safe than sorry, and it was a decision many supported and concurred with. Passengers may be infected with a 2019 novel coronavirus, the Lulian Guerrero administration stated a week ago, in announcing the decision to reject the Westerdam even after the State Department had asked for the cruise ship to be allowed to dock on Guam. No, okay. Well, I think probably most everybody supported that. And I think the separatists were somewhat taken aback when they found out that the State Department asked, will you guys take that ship? And our local government said, nope. And that was the end of the story. Now, in a contradictory move for Guam, the Hong Kong men's national basketball team will be allowed to visit Guam in a tournament that serves as a qualifier for FIBA. I suppose that stands for Federation International Basketball or something like that. The International Basketball Federation. The team from Hong Kong is said to arrive on February 20. Guam, in accordance with U.S. travel rules in response to the virus outbreak, has banned the entry of foreigners who have had a history of travel from China 14 days before their entry date into Guam or other parts of the United States. Arrivals from Hong Kong are still allowed into Guam and other destinations, although some nations have banned arrivals from Hong Kong as well. Guam no longer has direct scheduled flights from Hong Kong, and no charter flights from Hong Kong have been scheduled to arrive as of Wednesday. Passenger arrivals from Hong Kong to Guam would then have to go through transit points such as Manila or South Korea. Based on answers to the Guam Daily Post's query, there is no plan to give the visiting Hong Kong national team health scrutiny at Guam Airport upon arrival, unless they show flu-like symptoms. The Department of Public Health and Social Services health screening will kick in only when a passenger displays symptoms, according to a response from GovGuam. It doesn't make sense for Guam to turn away a cruise ship that boarded passengers from Hong Kong and then welcome a sports team, also from Hong Kong, without precautionary health screening upon arrival of everyone on the team. That's a slam dunk, Real Joe Cruz.
You better Hong Kong believe it, sir.
Yeah. The contradiction stands out, and it might be time to refine Guam's new coronavirus readiness plan. Waiting for symptoms to manifest might be too great a risk to take, considering that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has stated some patients may not show symptoms of the pneumonia-like disease for 14 days. We understand this health challenge is new to places across the globe, and while Guam still doesn't have a single confirmed case of the virus, it helps to continue to discuss ways to tighten and revisit the procedures to protect our island from getting the virus. Given that local officials have acknowledged the arrival of the new coronavirus on Guam may be a matter of when, rather than if it does reach here, we do need to continue to think about how to close the gaps that would lead to the virus arrivals sooner rather than later. We need to buy time before the virus gets here. Every day and every corrective action will count. I just wonder what prompted the government to do this flip-flop. Something like maybe, well, you know, our basketball teams are going to play too, and if we don't let the Hong Kong basketball team come in, it's going to really screw up the tournament. Therefore, we shouldn't let, you know, or some other bogus reasoning process like that. Because I agree with the Post. You know, if there is no risk that we should engage in if we can completely avoid the risk. And the way to completely avoid the risk is to say no Hong Kong, no Macau, no China. Sorry, folks. Come back later. Okay, so I award the coveted Blue Star to the Post today. Having accomplished that, I'm going to take just a short break here.
If you own a Toyota, please listen to this. It could help you avoid injury, maybe save your life. The Takata airbags installed in certain Toyotas can explode and shoot out sharp metal fragments at people inside the vehicle. You don't need to be in a collision. They could explode any time. In the U.S., these airbags have caused 26 deaths. There's been a worldwide recall of Takata airbags, and most have had the faulty parts replaced. But here in Guam, there are still over 3,000 Toyotas on the road with potentially lethal airbags, and yours could be one of them. So please, take your Toyota to Atkins Grow, even if you didn't buy it from us, and get the inflator replaced. It costs you nothing, it takes just about an hour, and it could save a life, yours or someone you love. The AK song says we're here for life. That's never been more true.
At Atkins Grow, we're here for life.
And now back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Well, before I get into the card, I'm going to mention that the Real Joe Cruz once again called it. Yesterday, when I was describing the latest kerfuffle at the Civil Service Commission, dealing with Linda Uggan and Idinga. You remember that?
I do.
Yeah, my analysis was that the administrative law judge said that the termination of Linda Uggan was good, and in effect, sustaining that decision. And that was his decision. The Civil Service Commission then had the ability to sustain that decision, revoke it, or modify it. 3 voted to sustain, 1 voted against the decision. And I couldn't remember that person's first name. I could remember that her last name was Tuncap.
Oh, Jadine.
Well, and on the way, and you said I'd probably remember it on my drive home.
Ah, I see.
I was about 2 miles down the road.
And you did.
And Priscilla pops into my head.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was Priscilla Tuncap.
Very good, sir.
Yeah, so that's a name that will go down in history because the chaos that will ensue at the Department of Parks and Recreation now that we have a shippo named Patrick Lujan and a gippo named Linda Uggan, given all of the feedback from the employees there at the Civil Service Commission hearing, and in a real anomaly, a signed letter, something you don't see every day. Priscilla, you can take a lot of pride in knowing that your vote really counted. Okay, let's see what we've got on the card here today. I'm going to just mention the first item on the card, which is Taitano versus the community. And then I've got Bavakwa versus Chamorro culture. That's a good one. And an even better one, LGBTQIA versus Buttigieg. And then I've got Christine Boleto versus Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. I've got Chief Ignacio versus you. And then Howard Hills versus political status. I've talked about Howard Hills before. Howard Hills has achieved something of a national reputation writing about the territories. He got his start right here on Guam. He was Charles Troutman's right-hand man back in the days when Charles Troutman was the compiler of laws stationed at the legislature. Howard took a commission in the Navy and became the Navy's kind of Micronesia man and has built a whole career around the Western Pacific political status, et cetera, et cetera. And he's written an article that I'm going to believe it or not, severely critique when we get to that part of the card. Okay, starting out with Titano versus the community. And again, I suppose I need to explain that we have a senator named Kelly Marsh, and the way she lists her name, it's Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, Marsh, M-A-R-S-H, 2 words that I'm pretty comfortable with. I've mentioned that I had a high school friend named Mike Kelly, so every time I see the word Kelly, I think it's a surname, but it's not. I know it can be a first name. And it has been around for a long time, and it fits right in with the time, because when you see Kelly, they can be male or female or any of the other sexes that we now recognize today. We don't say that Kelly is a masculine name or Kelly is a feminine name. They can be Kelly. So Kelly Marsh, yeah, but then after that, she puts the word Titano in parentheses. And it takes too long to say Kelly Marsh, parenthesis, Titano, close parenthesis, when I want to read her name and give, the full name. So what I have done is assigned a sound value to the parenthesis sign. So here's how the parenthesis sounds here on Tall Tales. So when you hear me go, that means parenthesis, if you were looking at what I was reading from. So the first item on the card would be Kelly Marsh Titano versus the community. And it doesn't. It's an article that appears in Pacific Island Times, a very interesting monthly magazine, the publisher of which is Marvik Kagarangan, late of the Mariana's Variety and the Post, a very good journalist, does a really good job with this magazine. And there's an article in this magazine, and the author is Senator Kelly Marsh Titano, Ph.D. And the pull-out quote from the article reads like this: "Every FestPac participant comes back a cultural warrior, ready to help their community battle against its challenges and inspires others to do the same." And I'll tell you, it's quite an article. And it's all in defense of FestPac, and it tells you all kinds of things about FestPac that you wouldn't have known had you not read this article. Had you not read this article, you might be stumbling along thinking that it's a $350,000 boondoggle to send 100 people to Hawaii for really no good reason. But Kelly Marsh Titano, Ph.D., points out that it does all kinds of wonderful things. She doesn't claim cure for cancer, dandruff, or fallen arches, but just about everything else will be remedied by sending those 100 people to Honolulu. And I suppose that I could extract from her article the thought that we'll never get more value for $350,000 than we will by sending these 100 people to Honolulu. It's this piece is something to behold. My only critique of it is that it should start out with the words "once upon a time." Once upon a time, there was a senator named Kelly Marsh Titano, Ph.D., and she wrote this story. Okay, that's probably the end of my talking about Kelly Marsh Titano's incredible story. Until the next time we get to the $350,000, which, believe it or not, in spite of all of Titano's efforts, is the thing that most people want to talk about. Why are we spending $350,000 like that? And every time that comes up, I have to go back to my old saw of what I want to see as far as our government is concerned. There may be others, but this is what I would like to see. I would like to see an effective, efficient government operating within the rule of law that furnishes basic governmental services. That's all. That's all I want my government to do. That's all my government ought to be doing. That's all they should be thinking about. The rest of this stuff, the nice to haves, individuals, nonprofit organizations, clubs, whatever. Okay, from there we go to Bavakwa versus Chamorro culture. And this is a column in the Daily News, and the author of the column is Michael Bavakwa. Now, according to the attribution at the end of the article, it says Michael Bavakwa is an author, artist, activist, and assistant professor of Chamorro studies at the university. My investigation says that he's no longer an assistant professor at the university, that he quit at the beginning of the semester and is now on the payroll of guess who? I'll give you a hint of who he's working for. His new employment is at the legislature, and here's the hint as to which senator he's working for.
Very good hint, sir.
That kind of narrows it down, doesn't it? So here's what Bavakwa says. National issues can cause ideological conflicts. Whenever I would teach Guam history, the name Janet Benchouf would always come up. It's a name commonly known on Guam, at least among the general population. But it isn't a name commonly known on Guam, at least among the general population, but it was a name that was notorious for a short period in the early 90s, and one that probably deserves more mention. That's his way of saying she's a heroine. Yeah. Benchouf was the ACLU attorney who came to Guam to lead the fight against the then strictest anti-choice, anti-abortion law, Public Law 134-20, within the United States and its territories. She was the only person arrested under this law, which made national headlines for not only restricting the rights of a woman to a legal abortion, but also criminalizing speech about abortion. Benchouf passed away in 2017. Her obituary from the New York Times even features a quote from former Governor Joseph Ada. This event represents a fascinating moment where we can see the potential conflicts between different ideological frameworks for understanding rights, and then here's the key words, and identity. Identity. We have to be able to understand identity. Which identity group do you fit into? Which identity group's interests are furthered by this decision? Which identity groups are retarded by this decision? Because identity groups are what society is all about. The rights of the individual subordinate to those of the identity group. Okay, going on with Bavakwa's op-ed here. Guam commonly sees itself as just an extension of the U.S. Now, I'm always one to, to kind of do a Frank Luntz here and test the impact of a word or a couple of words used in a particular expression to see what impact they have. Now, the key word in the phrase that I read is the word just. Examine this sentence as I read it in two different ways. Guam commonly sees itself as an extension of the United States. Number one. Number two, Guam commonly sees itself as just an extension of the U.S. Just an extension. Oh, well, that's not so hot, right? We're just an extension of the U.S. So Guam commonly sees itself as just an extension of the U.S., so the debates in the U.S. over gun rights, Trump, climate change, etc., might naturally extend to Guam. They have Democrats and Republicans, and so do we, right? This isn't always the case. These debates sometimes become contorted as they cross the Pacific. Sometimes they can line up, but other times they will move and align differently, forming new coalitions of identity, where what is liberal there is now conservative here. The prism of political discourse will form in a different way. Now, I could agree with a lot of what he says here, and I could draw some interesting conclusions that he could also draw, but that isn't how it turns out. It goes on to say it can be the same debate, but figures may move because of differences of culture, history, and a world around them. This anti-abortion law and the issue of abortion itself can be one of those things. Now, here we go. I am someone who aligns easily with the pro-choice abortion rights feminist side of the issue. Okay, make a note of that. Michael Bavacqua is pro-abortion. However, this historical moment pulls me in different directions. I disagreed with the cultural arguments made by anti-choice advocates such as then Archbishop Anthony Apparon and then Senator Elizabeth Areola, saying that abortion was against Chamorro culture. Now, had someone poked a microphone in my face at that time, that's probably what I would have said. I don't hold myself out as an historian like Bavacqua does. I probably could, but I don't. But I remember my earlier days here in Guam. I remember there was a story about one doctor who would do abortions. And he was held in very low repute by almost everybody. I'm not going to mention his name, but I could. I remember the guy's name. I remember exactly where his office was. And the feeling that I got, and oftentimes the best examination of culture is kind of the feeling that you get as you develop an understanding for it. But the feeling that I got was that Chamorros didn't care much for abortion, that it was contrary to the ideals, folkways, mores, culture, etc. of almost all Chamorros. Now, that's my magic sample of one. That's at least the product of my research, but that's the way I thought about it. But Bavacqua said, I disagreed with the cultural arguments made by anti-choice, meaning anti-abortion advocates such as the Archbishop and Senator Elizabeth Areola, saying that abortion was against Chamorro culture. And then he goes on to explain, he said, for me, I don't see Catholicism as the alpha and omega of Chamorro culture. For me. So here is the great arbiter of what Chamorro culture is and isn't. For me, I don't see Catholicism as the alpha and omega of Chamorro culture. It has been a very important part for centuries. I would say, one of the building blocks of Chamorro culture is the Catholic Church. And let's take a break, and I'll come back to this.
Always here to help you. This island is our home. Plains roots.
Wow, nice smile. So perfect and all.
Thanks. I owe it all to Dr. Robert Yang and his smile team. They do wonders for a healthy, happy mouth.
Got teeth? Don't wait until they hurt. Schedule your routine checkup and cleaning with Dr. Yang and his smile team. Suite 119 in the East West Business Center, Upper Tumon. Call 647-8702 or 3.
The best thing that happened to teeth since toothpaste.
Dr. Yang and his smile team.
They make smiles happen.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So we got about 8 more minutes to that big halftime show that the real Joe Cruz and I look forward to every afternoon. And I think right after the big halftime show will be a good time for us to make our announcement of the really good news, don't you, real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if I look like I'm going to stumble forward, remind me right after the show. Okay, let's stop a minute and talk about the word culture. It's a word that a lot of folks kick around. They really don't have a good handle on what it means. The most recent example of the use of culture, it's a word to use to defend something that almost everyone would agree in the abstract is cruelty to animals. I'm talking about cockfighting. If you were to take people from almost anywhere and gave them this mental image, take 2 roosters, strap sharp knives to one of their ankles, excite them and anger them by poking them at one another, and then turn them loose and bet on which one is going to kill the other. If you were to do that and say, "Is this cruel?" you'd have a hard time finding anybody who said no, it's not cruel. I think we've even had a Gods and Arrow come along and say that. So to cover that, the C word is brought out. Oh yeah, but it's part of our culture. We've been doing it for a long. We've been doing it for a long time. It may be wrong, but get out of my face. It's part of our culture. So that's kind of the way the C word is often used to justify the unjustifiable. But I have a definition from Merriam-Webster, which is admittedly very short. Books, treatises have been written on culture, what it means, what it is, what it isn't, how you discover it, how you measure it, how you describe it, etc. But I'll just read something from Merriam-Webster here. Culture, the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. Also, the characteristic features of everyday existence, such as diversions or a way of life, shared by people in a place or time, shared by people in a place or time. For instance, popular culture or Southern culture. Here's another example. The set of values, conventions, or social practices associated with a particular field, activity, or societal characteristic, studying the effect. No, that's not the right one. Here it is. The integrated pattern of human knowledge, belief, and behavior that depends upon the capacity for learning and transmitting knowledge to succeeding generations. That's a workable definition of culture. And Kellis, I'll bet you can tell me a lot about culture.
Well, what I was going to say is that some of the people that are arguing against the Catholic Church and etc. are also arguing for the Catholic Church and for the Spaniards, for the culture. So they're arguing both sides because I'm saying you can't have one without the other. Like they didn't have roosters or chickens on Guam before the Spanish came. They also didn't have carabaos or pigs or etc. dogs. So. Yeah. For the ones that are sitting there saying it's a cultural thing, and they're sitting there saying, unless you're saying it's a Spanish thing, then yes. But these are the ones that are saying, they're all for the culture, protect the land, all that. But I think their culture comes up only when it's something that they truly want. You know, they don't want the military here, so let's get the cultural sites that no one has ever even heard of for, you know, hundreds of years, you know, Paget and whatnot like that. And then once they find it, discover it, then they just trash it. You know, there's beer cans and trash all over Paget right now, but the sites that are out at Retidian and whatnot that are still controlled by the government are pristine. So what I'm getting at is it's culturally responsible when it will benefit them, and it's the them. You know, it's us, not the them. You know what I'm exactly what we're talking about here.
I do, Kellis. Yeah. So it's hard to describe the contemporary use of the word culture in current events without using the word pretext. That it is a pretext to justify the unjustifiable.
And it's also the pretext to justify what I want.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's like I want the military off the island because this one fern tree is, you know, on there. But it's like the military knew about this one fern tree for how many years, and they're actually keeping it alive.
For 20 years.
They used to be all over the island, and now there's only one, and it's on a military base.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, so I suppose it sounds a lot better than, and that, you know, I often say effective, efficient government operating within the rule of law that furnishes basic government services. That's what I want to see. And I always say, this is what I want to see. I don't know if anybody else does or not, but this is what I would like. But I suppose it has more impact if I were to say, our culture demands that we have an effective, et cetera, right?
Yes, it is very true.
Because I take myself
our
out.
culture demands that the potholes. You know, I mean, culturally, we should not be driving the cars. We shouldn't be complaining about the potholes. We also shouldn't be complaining about, you know, the money from the government. You know, there's millions of dollars for the war claims, et cetera. Because, you know, what's money? We should go back to fishing and farming and et cetera. That's what I think. But I got to go. I'm where I need to be. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, thanks a lot for calling. So from now on, I think when I ask you, Real Joe Cruz, if you've opened the Tom line and the Jimmy line, I'm going to ask you if you have opened the Breath of Fresh Air line.
Okay, sir.
And that would be Kellis.
Okay.
His ability to cut through the crap and make a common sense assessment of what's really going on is pretty refreshing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I noticed you've got someone on my screen here called Jim Rohr.
Yeah, we're seconds against the break right now, sir.
Well, that way I won't have to correct you and tell you that it's probably Tim Rohr.
Yeah, it probably is, sir.
Yeah, so Tim, I know I have a sense of our conversation is going to take a little while anyhow, so if you can hang on through the break or call back after the break, you'll be the first caller I go to right after the break. Thanks for calling, Tim.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
No signs of slowing. I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. The coronavirus keeps spreading and keeps killing. On Friday, Chinese authorities reported more than 5,000 new cases as the epidemic shows no signs of topping out. Nearly 1,400 dead. No deaths in the U.S., but the CDC confirms a 15th case of infection.
It's the first among Americans evacuated from Wuhan, China, and quarantined at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. This patient is isolated at the hospital and is not a risk to the general public.
San Antonians should feel confident and continue to go about their lives.
Mayor Ron Nierenberg.
Fox's Eben Brown reporting. Meantime, the first passengers from the cruise ship Westerdam disembark in Cambodia and head home. 5 countries had blocked that Holland-America ship over fears that passengers might have the virus. On Thursday, Japan confirming its first coronavirus death. In Washington, some might call it a Barr fight. Attorney General Bill Barr issuing a rare and stinging rebuke of the president.
In an interview with ABC News, Barr saying the president's tweets about Roger Stone and other cases are, quote, disruptive.
I have a problem with some of the tweets. To have public statements and tweets about cases pending in the department.
The president vented earlier this week, complaining that the DOJ recommendation of 7 to 9 years in jail for Roger Stone was, quote, horrible and very unfair. After the president's tweet, the attorney general downgraded the recommended sentence, leading Democrats to call for his head.
Fox's John Roberts. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell responding to the dust-up, saying that he's urging the president to listen to Attorney General Barr. America's listening to Fox News.
Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in? Wait, hold on, that was last month. Now it's this month. But by popular demand, we're extending our New Year's solution 4.65% personal loan through February. Money for whatever you want at 4.65% APR from Bank Pacific. We're still celebrating.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon is stirring up some of your favorite drinks all night long. Come down on Wednesday and Friday nights from 5:30 to 10 p.m. Indulge in some of your favorite local cuisine and pair it with your favorite drink. From our ice-cold beers, our finest selection of wines and liquors, to our top-notch cocktail specials, your friends at Mezcla Bistro Tumon are ready to serve you. Why limit happy to only an hour? The Mezcla family reminds everyone to drink responsibly. See you on Wednesday and Friday night.
Democrats push forward, preparing for the next presidential caucuses.
We need to do that in a way that does not build walls, that does not separate us from our neighbors. And I think using modern technology, having sufficient manpower to do the job will do it.
Senator Bernie Sanders saying the U.S. needs to protect the borders as he and 3 other candidates participated in a town hall in Las Vegas on Thursday, sponsored by a Latino voters group. Former Mayor Pete Buttigieg says he wants new protections for young people in the U.S. illegally.
Being a student is demanding enough without the distraction of the pressures you were experiencing, wondering whether your place in your country, and again, I view this as your country, is secure. We must, for this reason, not only act to restore DACA, but act to create that path to citizenship so that you're not in that situation to begin with.
Senator Amy Klobuchar and billionaire Tom Steyer also spoke during the town hall. The Nevada caucuses are Saturday, February 22nd. Oklahoma prepares to reinstate executions.
Attorney General Mike Hunter says Oklahoma will resume executions using a 3-drug lethal injection protocol that he calls humane and constitutionally valid.
We are assured that any challenges to the updated 3-drug protocol will clear the judicial process.
Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
The state put the lethal injections on hold after a series of botched executions. Last month was the hottest January since scientists began keeping records in 1880. U.S. government forecasters say the global average land and ocean surface temperature in January was 2.05 degrees Fahrenheit above the average January temperatures for the 20th century. And the blame? Climate change. I'm Carmen Roberts. This is Fox News.
Cocoa Coffee Company is now available at Circle K. Single origin coffee beans carefully sourced and locally roasted to give you the freshest cup of coffee Guam has to offer. Grab a cup that's brewed every 30 minutes or purchase a bag of the locally roasted whole beans. Flavors now serving: light medium roasted Ethiopia and medium dark roasted Jamaican Blue Mountain. Exclusively available at Circle K. With every Cocoa Coffee Company purchase, a portion of the proceeds will go towards the Cocoa Recovery Program.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Michael St. Nicholas. Our veterans deserve the best, and I'm working hard to make sure they receive what they earned defending our freedom. If you need help receiving the benefits you earned from the VA or the Defense Department, please call my office at 475-6453 or go online at stnicholas.house.gov. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you for your service.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael St. Nicholas.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific. Banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So here we are, once again. What a wonderful show we put on every afternoon at 1700. It just gets better and better every day.
You know, sir, isn't this a good time to tell everybody the good news, or would you want to wait till later?
I would have forgotten.
Okay.
The good news. Monday is a national holiday. It is President's Day. The banks will be closed. The post office will be closed. I don't think the government of Guam is going to be closed. But a lot of places are going to be closed, and you're probably all out there saying, geez, I hope Tall Tales does not go off the air on Monday because it's a holiday. Well, here's the good news. There will be a Tall Tales on Monday. I know everybody out there in our international radio listening audience is extremely happy about that. They're not any happier than the real Joe Cruz, who was just jumping with joy back there in the control room saying, oh boy, Tall Tales on Monday, right, real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir. Gee golly, sir. Absolutely.
There we go. Okay, I'm going to go to Tim here in just a second. Tim is on line 2, but I want to read one post here before I do that. This is from Jose. When is it okay to disenfranchise a Chamorro person using the dominating colonial rule of law? When that Chamorro is hidden out of sight in a mother's womb and the termination of their lives is justified spouting Roe versus Wade as the law of the land. Exactly what happened when attorney Areola, with the backing of Lou Leon Guerrero, argued when the island of Guam unilaterally voted to ban abortion on Guam back in 1990, and the bill was signed into law by Governor Atta. True enough. So let's see, Tim is on too. Tim, what can you tell us about culture and abortion?
Hey, Bob. So for the actual facts, for anybody who really wants to know what Senator Elizabeth Areola actually said. There's a book called Asian Pacific Islands, American Women, a Historical Anthology. I know that's a mouthful, but Historical Anthology, Asian Pacific Women, find it. And there's a whole chapter in that book that's dedicated to the abortion battle on Guam. And it's written by somebody I believe who's still on Guam and still teaches at UOG. Her name is Vivian Loyola Dames, or Dames, D-A-M-E-S. So the whole chapter is about the abortion wars back in the 1990s. So we can find out who really said what. Number one, Archbishop Apron did not make the cultural argument. He made the same argument Governor Atta was making, and it had nothing to do with pro-life. It had to do with Guam's sovereignty. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
So the whole abortion thing was used as sort of a way of getting Guam free and independent, like Mr. Bavakwa wants. We wanted to throw off the shackles of the U.S. Judicial system by claiming that Guam had its own right to self-govern and everything. So the abortion issue was just used for that. Apron made the same statement. He didn't even quote Catholic teaching in that argument. Second, Senator Elizabeth Areola did not say it's against the culture. She said that based on the statistics that she had of over 600 abortions a year at the time, most of which were Chamorro babies, she made the argument that why are we even fighting to sustain the culture when we're killing all of our own, essentially, paraphrase. There's not going to be anybody here to enjoy, being Chamorro. We're killing them. And actually today, the statistics, last stats that we got, show that close to 70% of all abortions are Chamorro babies. And Chamorros, of course, are already a minority on this island. So, that's, and then to the Catholic argument, in that chapter, the number one champion of abortion rights is the current governor, Lulian Guerrero. I'm not making this up. It's in the book. Lulian Guerrero and her cousin, Anita Areola, okay, credit their education at Academy of Our Lady of Guam and the Sisters of Mercy for their pro-choice radical positions. So much for blaming the Catholic Church for standing in the way of abortion rights or whatever. It's all in that book. Might as well get the facts.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. Very interesting. It puts an interesting kind of spin on the whole story, doesn't it? Thanks for calling in. Appreciate it.
You bet. You bet.
And let's see, I've got Dr. Tom Poole. All right. Good afternoon, Doc.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Judge. I wanted to ask, and you may have covered this in the past, and I didn't know, but I just was made aware, and it was sort of an obvious thing that I'd never really considered, that anytime someone is charged with, killing a pregnant woman, they're invariably charged with a double homicide. And it would seem that, if that infant, well, we're not going to call it an infant yet, but if that child in there is alive, I mean, it just doesn't seem that sometimes it's alive and it's a murder, and other times it's not.
Tom, are you familiar with Schrodinger's cat?
Yes, I am.
It's kind of like Schrodinger's cat, isn't it? It's both dead and alive at the same time.
Exactly. Well, exactly, and I don't mean to be funny about this at all, but it does seem like sort of a legal conundrum there that, how can you sometimes be alive and then, Schrodinger's cat is an excellent analogy, Judge. You're right.
Well, let me take a crack at that. I know a lot about that bill. It was only enacted maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I put pen to paper and scribbled that bill out and testified on it. And it actually uses the phrase unborn child, so that killing an unborn child, under the right circumstances, can be murder. However, we also say that, and we create what lawyers would call legal fictions. In other words, something that we know is not true, but we go along with it in order to reach a particular result. As an example of a legal fiction, the child of two legally married people who have been married for more than 9 months is conclusively presumed to be the legitimate child of that pair. Even if everybody in town knows it's not the case, it's a legal fiction. And the reason for the legal fiction is for the stability of the family. So we have this legal fiction that a woman has a right of privacy that would allow her to abort a child during the first 3 months of her pregnancy. Of course, we don't call it a child; we call it something else. And and that legal fiction is under the Democrats has come right up to the point where Democrats now, the current Democrat position is that abortion has to be legal right up until the time of birth, and the government has to pay for it. And a couple of really good Democrats like Northam and Virginia say, well, if there is a botched abortion and the child is born alive, it's up to the mother what to do with the child, whether to allow it to stay alive or to die. So it is a classic, you used the word cognitive dissonance the other day, a classic case of cognitive dissonance. We're very concerned about the child in the womb. If for instance, a robber shoots at the woman and kills the woman and the child at the same time, well, that's murder. But if the woman decides that she doesn't want to carry the child and goes to a doctor, that's a woman's right.
Well, and the other irony, to me at least, is that there may not actually be intent on the part of the person killing. He may not even know, for example, that the mother's pregnant, and he still gets the double homicide, jolt. And I'm not trying to make a value judgment here. I'm just pointing out the inconsistency, and I'm sort of perplexed by it.
Well, one of the things that if you study logic, that so much depends on your basic premise, that if your basic premise is wrong, you may still be able to build a very logical argument on that wrong premise. That if anyone would buy the premise, he would buy the logic that takes you to the ultimate result. So the basic premise here is that this so-called right of privacy allows a woman to take the life of an unborn child. And once you go along with that, then you can take it forward from there. But it is not logical. It's not sensible on its face.
Yes, sir. Well, Judge, thanks for exploring that for me. I don't think I'm not any happier with it, but I think I understand a little better what at least the source of it is in the law.
Yeah, well, there isn't a hold in this area of abortion. There is not a whole lot of joy in this whole area of the law. So,
thanks very much, Judge.
Okay, thanks for calling, Tom. It's always a pleasure. So, Jose made a good point, and Tim clarified some of these things that in a roundabout sort of way, Elizabeth Areola kind of got at the culture. She said, why are we talking about our Chamorro culture and trying to preserve it when we killed 600 Chamorro babies with abortions? There isn't going to be anybody left. And according to Tim, 70% of the abortions that occurred on the island when we were still doing abortions were Chamorro babies. And, of course, Lulian Guerrero, is nothing new for Lulian Guerrero. She was in the front lines of the fight back in 1990. And you'll recall she made quite a name for herself about 6 months ago when she sicked Jane Flores on the task to go out and find an abortionist on the island because we had an emergency. We hadn't had a reported abortion for 6 months. How can we do that? So I want to go on with Bavacqua here and the Chamorro culture. But I need to stop for a second and go to Elwin Champaco Quitano's post. And Elwin, I'm going to have to take a different view from you from yours, so fasten your seatbelts. Here's what Elwin says. On Guam, we live with two kinds of cultural perspectives and practice: colonial culture and indigenous culture. More often, locals have leaned toward the colonial perspectives and not even know it. We practice so much that has been fabricated that there are few things we can identify as truly indigenous. So if what you mean by fabricated, if you're talking about the Frank Rabone addition to Chamorro dances that we've had for around 30 years, I can completely understand what you mean, that people say, oh, we've got to have the cultural dancers now, and there's nothing that ties the cultural dancers and the chanters to, quote, indigenous culture at all. I'm hoping that's what you mean, Elwin. But here's the part I don't think that I can agree with. On Guam, we have two kinds of cultural perspectives and practices: colonial culture and indigenous culture. Well, one of the things, one of what an anthropologist would tell you is a cultural isolate is how any particular culture deals with things that are new, things from the outside. And things that are new and things from that come from the outside are the history of humans. True ingenuity is an extremely rare occurrence. And I've confessed this before, my idea of what indigenous means is kind of the National Geographic representation of indigenous that I remember when I was a youngster reading National Geographic, that someone discovered some tribe in New Guinea or the Philippines or some very isolated location that had never had any contact with Westerners in its history. And because of that, we're very vulnerable to Westerners. But, when you're talking indigenous here on Guam, you're talking about a society that first had contact with the West in 1521 and was colonized by then the most powerful Western nation in the world, Spain, in 1667 when Salvatores came here. So I wonder what one would classify if one were looking at what was going on in 1666, if what one would classify that people do nowadays that is, quote, indigenous culture. And I even wonder more why it matters, because as time goes on, cultures adopt new things, they change things, cultures change, they're dynamic, they grow, and one of the things that I always point to is this. If you walk into somebody's house, a person with whom you're very familiar, and you don't knock on the door, you just walk in and you don't know if anybody's there, do you know what you'd say, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
What?
Oi!
Yeah. Do you know where that comes from?
No.
What does the captain of a ship or of a boat say when he's hailing another ship?
Oi!
Ahoy!
That's what I always do.
Yeah, ahoy! Yeah. And some of the lingo, for instance, ko tungu no hafta manu masangan I palabran refrigerator gifino tomorrow, icebox.
Yeah, icebox.
Because when the Americans brought ice boxes here, you could say kahit, but most people just adapted that English word icebox, and it sticks. Your refrigerator, icebox fan, So that's how language works. It picks up new words, new structures, etc., and culture kind of works the same way. So, Elwin, when you say we live in two kinds of cultural perspectives, colonial culture and indigenous culture, my sense is that there's probably a single identifiable culture here that has elements that come from the U.S. mainland, that come from Spain, come from the Tempun Japanese, that come from Spain. You know, the names. How many Spanish names are in our phone book? If you handed somebody the Guam phone book and you tore the front cover off it and you said, where do you think this phone book came from? The person would pick it up and say, yeah, I don't know, Mexico, because of all the Spanish names in it. Well, how many people on Guam can speak Spanish? The lucky ones that took it from Marge Driver in high school, and that's about it. Okay, so a little bit of a sidetrack there, a very valuable bit of history from Tim as to what happened back in 1990. A little bit of chatter from Merriam-Webster and Elwin about what we mean when we say culture. Very nicely put statement of the dichotomy here that Kellis so nicely described. If it's something that we think would benefit us, it's probably part of the culture. But if it's not, and we don't like it, then, oh, that's not part of the culture. Banning cockfighting would not be part of the culture.
So would you say that there's an evolution of culture and language over the years?
Constantly.
I see.
Yeah, that's cultures that aren't able to evolve
Disappear?
disappear.
Become extinct?
Yeah.
Okay, so some people would say it's a de-evolution, though, right?
I think the purists with the Fino Hadza gang, you know, the ones who say, I don't know why they talk about Chamorro. It's got so many Spanish words in it. That's not Chamorro.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and once again, the history of the world is the history of migration and movement. It's not the history of people staying in one place and being very successful because they are so rooted in one place. Okay, so let me go back here and pick on Bavacqua a little bit more. Where is that article here? Here it is. He starts out by talking about the anti-abortion movement being the bishop and Senator Elizabeth Areola. And according to Tim, he misstated, the historian does not have his historical facts correct. And it shouldn't have been that hard because there is a publication that lays this out quite clearly, according to Tim. And then Bavacqua goes on to say, for me, I don't see Catholicism as the alpha and omega of Chamorro culture. Now, alpha and omega, the beginning and end of Chamorro culture. It's probably not the alpha and omega, but it's probably the Bravo and the X-ray of Chamorro culture. It's pretty close, because so much of what we recognize as traditions here on Guam are traditions of the Catholic Church. And again, when I first came here, even more so, you know, the rules of courtship, the rules of marriage, which of the parents paid for the wedding, who paid for the reception, and all of those sorts of things. So Bavacqua says, for me, I don't see Catholicism as the alpha and omega of Chamorro culture. It has been a very important part for centuries, but I don't think that it should dictate what is Chamorro or not. Well, whether it should dictate or not is not the same as what it is. So if you're talking culture, if you're talking about the culture of a particular group, people, ethnic group, whatever, you start out with the descriptive, what it is. And you can't describe it with the prescriptive. You can't say this is what it should be. So when Bavacqua says he doesn't see Catholicism as the alpha omega of Chamorro culture, he says, I don't think that it should dictate what is Chamorro or not. Okay, so that's what he thinks it should be. So if we concluded that the Catholic religion and the Chamorro culture were very close together, Bavacqua doesn't like it, and he doesn't think it should be that way. So this makes him kind of the expert on what is and what isn't Chamorro. Okay, seventh inning stretch coming up, and we'll come back to this after that.
Family Finance has been serving the people of Guam since 1959, and they'll continue to be there for you in the years to come. Whether you're looking to get a personal loan for that summer vacation or paying off those long overdue bills, Family Finance has got you covered. Apply for a personal loan from $1,000 up to $3,600 by calling Family Finance in Hagåtña at 475-4545, Upper Tumon at 647-5626, or in Dededo, 633-4473. Family Finance, serving the people of Guam since 1959.
Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in? Wait, hold on, that was last month. Now it's this month. But by popular demand, we're extending our New Year's solution 4.65% personal loan through February. Money for whatever you want at 4.65% APR from Bank Pacific. We're still celebrating.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mezcla. Try their featured special for February. Southern Spice Crispy Fried Chicken. Louisiana-inspired fried half chicken served with red beans and rice. Available in Hagåtña and in Tumon at the Grand Plaza Hotel. For reservations, please call 969-2652.
So, seventh inning stretch, center field bleachers, Wrigley Field, Chicago. And we go from the Wrigley Field bleachers straight back to pre-Hispanic Guam. And I've got a couple of interesting posts here that have picked up on the discussion. One from Jose. I wager that ancient Chamorro people would not recognize a Lati stone as indigenous. In fact, they may call it merely fabricated. So my question is, if the indigenous people of today create a, quote, cultural practice, what is the measure of authenticity? Good question, Jose. And then with a little bit of levity here, Andre comes along and takes us back to the once upon a time part of the agenda. And he said, Kelly wants the governor to declare a state of emergency for the public swimming pools. I think she's going to be treading water in this year's election. Yeah, very good, Andre. I didn't hear that drum beat back there, Real Joe Cruz. Maybe. Well, he's alerting me to the next call. Let's hold off on that. Let me go back to Andre's statement here. Andre said, Kelly wants the governor to declare a state of emergency for the public swimming pool. I think she's going to be treading water in this year's election. Very good. Thank you, Andre, for adding a little bit of levity to that. And now we have Chris Duenas. Good afternoon, Chris.
Buenas tardes, señor.
Buenas, amigo.
Señor, nagangaw no Roberto, but Beto, hapadamo.
Tadzagwa, eh?
Tadzagwa. Uwekinukaw za and like mo no maagang ice box. Ahi no kumuntalaikan no idamo menu para dinner. Da angin stom demi kanilo po pega talo tatigi con ice.
Okay. Sinya lo I kung na tauto leknya icebox na anay it's on your refrigerator.
Ungana magay. Pues con ice no para me sea como con no freeze y dominicani para i icebox para todo otro.
Okay.
But Bob, I really called to opine a little bit on the national election, which you were talking about earlier, and how dangerous it is for us to elect any one of the far left candidates. I remember discussing this with you that I had my 3 Bs, my Buttigieg, Biden, and Bernie, but I have to replace one of my Bs. And so my new B is Bloomberg.
Uh-huh.
But they're all B, but the B that they all stand for is Baba, because they all believe, as you were discussing earlier, that it's okay to destroy life, and I completely don't agree with that.
And they've gone farther than that. Buttigieg kind of let the first cat out of the bag when someone said, "Is it possible to be a anti-abortion and a Democrat?" And he said, basically, no. And all the rest of the candidates that are still standing have said the same thing. If you're going to be a Democrat, you got to be pro-abortion. Just no getting around it.
You know what's interesting when I listen, and I think if he gets any more traction, there'll be more vetting. But the Democrats are trying to label him, at least the mainstream media, as a centrist on this deep dive, and probably in a month or so, bye Biden, in trying to grapple and find another candidate. They're kind of labeling him as a centrist. What I find interesting about Buttigieg is, obviously, which I don't particularly have a problem with. That's his decision to be a gay married man. But what's interesting is there's always tolerance, or his message is somewhat about tolerance and somewhat about acceptance. But there's no tolerance for those who would fight every day of their life to preserve life. That bothers me.
Sure. Well,
anyways, I wanted to mention one more thing, Bob.
Okay.
In watching our friends on Fox, I forget which, and I want to do this in honor of you. I forget which host it was, but you may have seen this. She had a segment with a 104-year-old Marine who put out a simple message. Hey, it's Valentine's. I want to see who would send me a nice message. And I think at the time that this host was having the conversation with this very articulate, very lucid 104-year-old Marine, I think there was like over 20,000 cards and messages that were sent to him. And I think that that's really what describes who we are as a nation and as a people, regardless of our evolving culture.
Well, I hope you're right, Chris.
Well, happy Valentine's to one of my favorite Marines, yourself.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you very much.
But that was, I thought that was a very touching story, and on this Valentine's Day, I just wanted to share that with you. Like I said, I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but it was pretty overwhelming, and quite an interview. And like I said, the gentleman was definitely, he considers himself, I believe, probably, unless it could be researched, but probably the oldest Marine. Went through 3 wars, I believe, World War II, Korean War. I forget what was completely enumerated, but man, I tell you, what an impressive gentleman. So, Viva Marines, and maybe you're going to get to 104 too, Bob.
I'm going to work on it. I'm going to work on it real hard, Chris.
Hey, enjoy your weekend, my friend.
Thank you, Chris. Always a pleasure. Thanks for calling. And let's see, I got James on the line. James. Okay. Howdy, James.
Hi, Bob. How you doing?
Good.
Party line, partisan, quote-unquote politics. You just mentioned something that, kind of perked my ears up, is that it's pretty much across the board. You can't be a Democrat unless you're pro-abortion.
Right.
Okay. let's take a look at that, and I want you to give me your thoughts on this. My thoughts on this is more along the lines of common sense. Just because the party is moving one direction doesn't mean that a duly elected representative of his constituents or his people is supposed to go along with every little thing that, quote unquote, the party says, because he's supposed to be representing his people. And I'll give you an example. My family has traditionally been Democratic most of their life, but I'm gonna qualify that by saying that the Democratic Party, the DNC, used to be more moderate, used to be more mainstream, used to be, you know, the party that stuck up for the little guy, the working guy. You know, it was, the Democrats have kind of traditionally been known as the working man's party. The Republican Party has kind of been the old boy, you know, big, huge corporate multimillionaire, you know, club. But that's changed. And, you know, Mom, my father's passed, but Mom's 86. And I can't repeat on the air what the comments are that my mom has about the Democratic Party these days. But she said, I guess I'm not a Democrat anymore because I just can't go along with this. This just doesn't make sense. This is not common sense. This is, you know. And I want to know what your thoughts are on when, like, Madam Speaker Pelosi stands up and says, everyone will stand behind this, and anyone who doesn't go along with this is an enemy, quote unquote, to the party. She said that, you know, a few months ago. But isn't a representative supposed to represent? I mean, I know lots of Democrats out there that like to hunt and fish, and they like their Second Amendment rights, and they want to have the right to protect their families, and they're hardworking, you know, pipe welders and pipe fitters, and you know, on down the line. They're moderate America. So since when does a representative not have the obligation to follow what his constituents in his area want, and to fall in line and be, quote unquote, partisan?
Interesting question, James. Let me take a crack first of all at what you said or about the part of your discussion that addressed abortion. For the Democrat Party nowadays, abortion is not a little thing. Abortion is everything. It is the foundation of the Democrat Party belief that almost everything they do is built around that. Politics, of course, is a contact sport. And I can tell you from my own experience in politics, part of the drill is to bend other people to your way. And if you study some of the successful political, quote, leaders, say LBJ, for instance, they develop all kinds of ways of bending people to their will and pulling them away from their constituents, so that for many people in the Congress, the idea is, how do I stay on the right side of the party and enhance my chances for re-election, and at the same time stay on the right side of my constituents? And the ones who figure it out are the ones that stay for a long time, the career politicians. The ones who stand on principle oftentimes don't last very long. I hope that gets close to your question.
Yeah, I'll go for that. I mean, it's a balancing act, and it pretty much always has been, and I can't really ever see a time when it probably wouldn't be. But the times have changed, and they've not changed for the better. It's very, wow, do I dare use the word totalitarian? You're either with us or you're against us.
Yeah, I agree.
No matter what the people from your state or from your district or whatever, no matter what they tell you that they want, you're going to do what we tell you you're going to do, or you're out, or you're on the outside looking in at the very least. You know?
I think that's the way it is.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
Okay, good question, James. Glad you brought it up.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Next, I've got Jack. Good afternoon, Jack.
Good afternoon, Bob. I just wanted to ring in real quick on this indigenous thing. We've had numerous discussions about the indigenous movement, and I think we need to really look at it. I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky. It has nothing to do with privilege. Very lucky to have a classical liberal education. And when we speak about the indigenous movements, we just like neoliberalism, neoconservatism, they have stages. We know that the suffrage movement in the United States was pro-life. The beginning of the suffrage was unanimously pro-life, and then it moved. It moved from pro-life to towards abortion. So I think we could say the same thing about the indigenous movement. I don't believe Mike Bavaca represents the original indigenous movements. I think he represents a neo-indigenous movement. I don't think he represents the classical indigenous movement. And just because when we had this women's march that first started here, that began here in Guam like a couple of years ago, I saw him at the head of the movement, of the march itself. And I was scratching my head. I said, this guy is pro-Chamorro. Why would he be in front? And then, I was reminded that, that pre-Christian days in ancient cultures, most of them, they did practice human sacrifice. And if you look at it at that sense that if the self is the predominant thing in a movement, then you could look at abortion being, not in conflict with that either Chamorro right or something. In fact, it's representing the true Chamorro rights because they're the ones who survived or who weren't aborted. So I was confused at the time of why he was in front of the march, but when I broke it down, in a mental exercise, it kind of makes sense because, human sacrifice is one of the touting points of these sorts of movements.
Of some. I couldn't tell you how many indigenous cultures practiced human sacrifice. There were a few, but I'll give you another explanation, and that is that Michael Bavaca is a neo-Marxist. And as a neo-Marxist, he sees the identity politics aspect of the whole indigenous thing as an easy mark to pick up and use in the furtherance of the cultural Marxist approach to separating Guam from the United States. It had nothing to do with historical ideology. It's a practical kind of an Antonio Gramsci type approach to what it is that he's doing and why he's doing. I'm just speculating here, but that's my analysis, Jack.
Well, yeah, with Marxists, they engage in a lot of historicism. That's with a C, not an S. Historicism. So yeah, they sort of like everything is the center of this local culture, regardless of what's happening on the outside. So, but I also would say that he's not even a classical Marxist.
No,
And,
well, neo-Marxists abandon classical Marxism. I've talked about that before on the program. The Frankfurt School,
the German school, yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
And how they determined that classical Marxism didn't work after World War I, when French workers and German workers could kill one another with carefree abandon. So they decided that they had to take a different tack. And the tack was to overcome the various social institutions of capitalist society, starting out with the schools and universities. And that's exactly what they've done.
True. So when I say that I'm a classical liberalist, I also believe in the classical indigenous movement. And if I give you just a simple definition, here in Guam, it would be the inability to operate under, Western principles such as, the ownership of property, recognitions of authority and stuff like that. So, why do we have the Chamorro Land Trust? And even the scheme of the Chamorro Land Trust doesn't really make sense in a Western civilization sort of property ownership. You say, what do you mean you own it by blood? So sure. I understand why we have the Chamorro Land Trust, and I understand that it operates outside the Constitution and is extra constitutional. But I also understand why the classical indigenous people presented this sort of idea of land occupying, because it's hard to say that you could sell your property outright. And what do you mean? I don't own it no more. I let you stay on it, but I didn't mean to sell it outright. But this is the thing that I have. So I think that a lot of the indigenous movements here in Guam, especially, has been hijacked. Just like the women's suffrage, women's rights has been hijacked, I think.
Good points, Jack.
Okay.
I got a break coming up here. You want to hang on till after the... Okay, thanks, Jack.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile Team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky. Home stretch. That means I've got about 7.5 minutes until the Real Joe Cruz and I kind of go to purgatory for a couple of days. Feel sorry for us. We're going to have withdrawal symptoms. We'll be jonesing all weekend. Really anxious to get back on the air with Tall Tales, 4 o'clock on Monday, and we're so happy that Monday is not a holiday, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. So just to kind of recool a little bit about what Jack was talking about here, about feminism and the indigenous thing. I see this as all kind of part of the same operation, the tilt towards neo-Marxism in our society, both here and in the mainland, and something to be on guard against. So I've got a little bit more here of this Bavacqua column. If I can't finish it today, I'm going to come back to it on Monday, because I think it's really important, and it is the opportunity for a lot of us to kind of test our thinking on some of these issues that are quite important but don't get aired out often enough to help us clear our thoughts. So I left off with this one momentous line. For me, I don't see Catholicism as the alpha and omega of Chamorro culture. It has been a very important part for centuries, but I don't think that it should dictate what is Chamorro or not. So Bavacqua weighs in and says that he has a better way, apparently. For instance, I don't feel that the Catholic idea of the church or a government being able to dictate what is right or not right for women's bodies. Boy. Yeah, did you swallow the feminazi line there, Michael? That is not right to dictate for women's bodies is in line with Chamorro matrilineal notions of female empowerment. He uses the word matrilineal. It's a nice sounding word, but matrilineal, the word line is in the middle of matrilineal. A matrilineal society is one in which kinship is determined through the females in the line. That is a matrilineal society. That you determine who is related to whom by who his mother was. Now, I wouldn't say that I'm an ace on Chamorro, the ancient Chamorro, etc., but I don't think it was a matrilineal society. And if it were, what were the famous matrilineal lines in pre-Hispanic Guam? Michael, I think your vocabulary is out of control. There are three words that travel together: matrilineal, matrilocal, and matriarchal. Matrilineal means you trace kinship and lineage through the women. Matrilocal means that when a man and a woman unite in whatever you want to call it, they relocate to the woman's village. That would be a matrilocal society. And again, I have no indication that the pre-Hispanic Chamorro society was matrilocal. And then we have matriarchal. And in a matriarchal society, using 20th century terminology, in a matriarchal society, the woman wears the pants. And it's often said that that even modern Chamorro society is matriarchal. And it could very well be correct. I go back again to my earlier days on the island when we had a friend who was, at that time I was in my 20s. My friend was probably 70. He's a pretty traditional gentleman, and he explained that I think he worked for the government of Guam, and he explained that his household routine was that he would get his paycheck every payday. He'd come home and he'd give it to his wife, who would cash the check and take care of everything that the house needed. He'd just give her his check and he was done. But it was okay because if he wanted to go and shoot pool on Saturday night, she'd always give him $5. Now, that would be a matriarchal society, and again, without making any value judgments and perhaps being a little irresponsible here, I'd say, I've heard it described that the women make all of the hard decisions, the budgeting and all of the, important decisions. The man's job is pretty much to have fun, have a good time. A matriarchal society. So if that's what you mean, Michael, that's what you should have said. You should have said matriarchal and not matrilineal, because you wasted a lot of my time here explaining what it was that you were trying to say. So once again, it goes back to the old, you must not only do the right thing, but you must do things right. So we'll come back to this on Monday. We're going to be gone here for a couple of days. The Real Joe Cruz and I will suffer through it, but we'll be back 1600 Monday afternoon. See you then.